Well, on behalf of the LaRouche Political Action Committee, I'd like to welcome all of you to today's event. And in fact, I think it is going to be quite an event. I know that whether we are talking about people in Washington or people scattered around the United States, there are many eyes glued to computer monitors today as we embark now on this critical post-election period. It is in fact the case that prior to the Tuesday election, Lyndon LaRouche had outlined a clear path that could have been taken. And again, this goes back indeed to the early days of the Obama administration. It continued, it escalated, warning after warning was issued prior to Tuesday from the standpoint of what the American people needed, what the nation needed, and what those who were seeking public office had to do. For the most part, those things were not done. The election has come and it has gone. And now the United States is in a very deep crisis. And who better to address that than Lyndon LaRouche? So ladies and gentlemen, without any further introduction, I bring you Lyndon LaRouche.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. The old man thanks you. Let's start with history, because American history in particular, because that is what our politicians have lost sight of. We are a constitutional republic, which is different than Europe. There is nothing like us as we were founded in Europe. In point of fact, the reason we were created, beginning with the Plymouth Colony settlement and the Massachusetts Bay Colony, was people from Europe, at that point English and some Dutch, recognized that the aspirations of humanity could not be realized at that time within Europe. And therefore we must move the best of European culture to a new territory separate from Europe and separate from the pressures of the corruption inherent in Europe, which I will refer to, the corruption. We launched the first success in this direction, even though there was an initiative by Columbus and others. But unfortunately, Columbus was under the control of the Habsburgs, and the entire Portuguese and Spanish nations were controlled completely by the Habsburg tyranny. So that where the settlers who settled from Spain in particular, who settled in the Americas, found themselves crushed by a Spanish faction which were the servants or slaves of the Habsburgs. So thus the launching of the Massachusetts Bay Colony was the first concrete step in founding what became later the United States. This Massachusetts colony was crushed later by the British as they were becoming an empire. But nonetheless, the legacy of what had been accomplished under the Winthrops and Mathers in Massachusetts during the period of a virtual republic in North America, this did not die. And under the leadership of various people, most notably Benjamin Franklin in the course of events, we founded a republic which was unique among all political systems on the world up to that time. Yes, the ideas that existed earlier, they're represented by people like Nicholas of Cusa in the great Florentine Renaissance and by his legacy. But the first time a political system was established which was fit for mankind was in North America in the area of Massachusetts in the 17th century. Now, Europe was punished for its bad behavior. It was punished because it was sucked into what was called the 7 Years' War. And in this process, the British Empire, which was then a company, a private company, the British East India Company, organized through its control over the British monarchy, organized a war on the continent of Europe, known as the 7 Years' War. Now, you understand the whole history of the United States and where we stand today and what the crisis is today in the United States and the world, this is what you have to take into account. See, we live in a time where people don't understand humanity. The idea of humanity, the idea of the individual person as human, no longer exists as knowledge in our educational institutions, for example. We don't have historians who are teaching in universities anymore. Oh, there were some retired relics like me hanging around and still know what history is and what the teaching of history should be. But in our schools, we don't have that. Our people don't have that. If you take the characteristics, for example, of the younger generation today, as the boomer generation, my children, so to speak, are dying out of old age and similar kinds of symptoms, that we don't have any knowledge. You know, people today will say, I exist from the time I'm born until the time I die. And I have to locate everything within that period of time. That's insane. That's immoral. But that is the popular belief today among the young adult and slightly older generation. They don't believe in history. They believe in history as some kind of a story. Like Obama, you can make up a fake story and call it history. Huh? It's like his autobiography, like a fake story. They don't believe in history. They don't realize that mankind, unlike all other living species, has this quality of immortality, which no animal has. Because no animal has the power of willful creativity. Yes, the universe is creative. Every aspect of the universe is creative. People who say that the universe is fixed and finite, they're idiots. The universe is inherently creative. Even the non-living part of the universe is creative. Look at astronomy. Look at real astronomy. It's creative. New galaxies are created. New stars are created. And these things affect the entire universal system. The universe is creative. Even the non-living side. The living side is creative. I mean, your grandfather was not a dinosaur. He was not a reptile. He was not a one-celled animal, or plant. Life is creative. Forms of life have evolved and as creations, not derivations. And mankind is unique in being a willful creator. We create through the medium of ideas, a medium of ideas which no animal is capable of doing. Therefore, when we talk about creating a society, we're talking about a society which is based on mankind's capability of shaping the future through the willful utilization of creative ideas, universal principles, for example, their discovery and their application. And that's what the Massachusetts Bay Colony represented. It represented specifically the proximate heritage of Nicholas of Cusa, who was the leading founder of all modern science, or at least a central figure in the leading of all modern science. And this was the beginning of modern European civilization, was this. And we in the United States represented that. We represented a distillation of what had been in European civilization, These ideas, which we can trace back to Plato and his immediate predecessors, we can trace them through the entire Charlemagne and other creatures of that type, human creatures, who had changed the course of mankind's destiny by being creative. But then Europe was always, as Cusa recognized, when he projected the colonization across the oceans before he died. And this legacy of Cusa was picked up by a Genoese navigator in the Portuguese service, who also was active in Spain, Christopher Columbus. And Christopher Columbus carried out the mission assigned, not to him, but to his heritage, to Christopher Columbus. The act of Christopher Columbus was a creative act, which reflected a creative movement within European civilization. Yes, it was crushed, but it was not eradicated. It was not uprooted. And here in North America, we had the opportunity. And when we recognized that we were a melting pot nation, to receive people from all over the world to participate in this mission, which the United States has come to represent through its Constitution, we became essential. If the United States were to die today, as it could on tomorrow morning, or some other proximate date, then civilization would die and every nation on this planet would disintegrate. It's now ready to disintegrate. We are moments away from the disintegration of the entire planet. The first place where it's going to collapse is in the transatlantic region, and Europe included. Then at a later point, China, India, and countries on the Pacific coast will degenerate. All of South America, all of Africa, all of Eurasia is on the verge of a process of disintegration now. And the reason is because we in the United States have lost our legacy, lost sight of it. We no longer believe in creativity. We believe in kissing the butt of somebody who may have more power than we do and hoping they like it. And don't use us up all at once. But that's what it is. Now, therefore, when you are dealing with the problems we face today, and we are now on the verge of a fascist dictatorship in the United States, but the ushering of a hyperinflationary form of fascist dictatorship, which is what's on the ways right now, under the new Congress. And you take a case like Rand Paul. This guy's a Nazi. He's a killer. He's the enemy of civilization. And he simply exemplifies a crew that is now recently elected, which is coming in to take seats in January in the Congress, which are fascist just in the same degree that Adolf Hitler was fascist. And the attempt is going to be made by these kinds of people, called Republicans, because they're Republicans who are also human. These are not. Rand Paul is not a human Republican. He's something. They will destroy civilization because for two reasons. First of all, morally. They're not fit. A society which lives under them is not fit to exist. No concession to a Rand Paul or to what he represents. None. Crush him. Because if we don't, we lose our nation. We have to think in those terms. And don't think in terms of parties. Don't think of Democratic Party, Republican Party. Republican Party doesn't mean anything anymore. It lost all meaning, all distinction. Huh? It's a crazy house. And some people in it are decent by instinct and some aren't. Rand Paul is one of those who aren't. So we have to look back to something, not party, we have to look to nation and to the meaning of our federal constitution, which is something which distinguishes us from Europe in terms of our legacy. You look back to figures like President Franklin Roosevelt. Look back to figures by Abraham Lincoln and others who were great heroes in that time. And these are the people who led, after Benjamin Franklin, after the others who created this nation, who led in creating this nation for the benefit of the world, as Franklin Roosevelt understood that mission. We exist not just for the benefit of the United States, we exist for the benefit of the world. Because if the United States goes down, and it can go down in the weeks ahead, we're in a hyperinflationary process, and under the present head of the Federal Reserve System, the United States is on a short fuse to suddenly vanish into chaos. Unless we change the way things have been going of late. Now, how did we become a nation, and how did we come into problems? We became a nation through a war against our British oppressors. And we are about to be destroyed under the influence of our British oppressors today. For example, in 1971, two actions occurred which have up to this point doomed the United States. One was the termination of the fixed exchange rate system, which had been installed at Bretton Woods by Franklin Roosevelt. The second thing that was done was to bring in a new world imperial system launched by the British monarchy through its instrument, Lord Jacob Rothschild. The world today is dominated by a banking system which is brought in to replace the United States fixed exchange rate system with the British system. And the British system is which is the Inter-Alpha Group system, is the financial power that controls the world's finances today. So therefore, our war is against the British Empire, the other English-speaking empire. You have the devil speaks English and we speak English. And there's a certain misunderstanding about the use of the language between the two, as the British will agree when it comes to me. Right. So therefore, what are we? How were we created? And how have we been destroyed? We were created through a process which led into the so-called Revolutionary War against the British Empire. How did we win that war? With the defeat of Cornwallis. How did we win it? We won it because the King of France, the King of Spain, and because the League of Armed Neutrality, led by Catherine the Great of Russia, this combination of forces enabled us to have the victory of establishing our United States. But then, beginning in 1782, under Lord Shelburne, who was at that moment the Prime Minister and also was the leader of the British East India Company, Lord Shelburne organized, through his establishment of the British Foreign Office, which he established, which ran an intelligence service which organized the French Revolution to destroy France, and which, with Metternich, cooperated to destroy Europe using, guess who? Napoleon Bonaparte as the instrument. Napoleon Bonaparte destroyed Europe. He was a British agent and didn't know it. What he did, he unleashed wars, just the same way the British had organized the 7 Years' War earlier, which had made a mess of all Europe. The British again went back to another 7 Years' War. The Napoleonic Wars. Remember the history of Napoleon? Napoleon was a fascist already. He was a no-count character. and he tried to run something on his own. Now, at the time Napoleon started his career as a military adventurer, France had a tradition of being allied with the Ottoman Empire against the Habsburg interest. That was the alliance. All right, so Napoleon went off onto this basis and went out into Egypt and so forth and had his little expedition trying to conquer the Mediterranean. And the British kicked his ass. He came back and he divorced his wife, whose family was tied to the Ottoman side of the French policy, and married a Habsburg princess. Now Napoleon was actually a tool of Metternich and the British. And Napoleon conducted wars, which are nothing but predatory wars, which destroyed all of Europe again, very much as the 7 Years' War had been used to weaken and destroy the nations of Europe earlier. And then they got rid of him, and the British, the Habsburgs, and the British controlled Europe. And the United States was placed in danger because no longer did the combination of forces exist to maintain the United States. Now, there's the other side of the thing. What was lost and how was it lost? What was lost was you had Jefferson became terrified, did crazy things. Other people who had been leaders of the American Revolution did crazy things, were destroyed, morally and otherwise. But we had a few presidents and a few other great leaders who came forward and kept returning us to the principles on which we had been founded, the constitutional principles on which we had been founded. And one of the great ones, John Quincy Adams, was typical and accomplished great things, not only while he was president and before as a diplomat, but also in providing the legacy for what Abraham Lincoln did. We've been the victims of this destruction by the British Empire. But the problem also has been that inside our country, as in Boston, with the Boston Vault crowd, or in New York, with the founding of the Bank of Manhattan by a trader who was working as a British agent, we have always had in us an enemy within. The enemy within was an extension of the British monetary financial interest, which is centered today in the Boston Vault, the banking interest, and is in the Manhattan banks in Wall Street, and also Chicago and a few other locations. But traditionally, it's Wall Street and Boston, where the British East India Company controlled things, and largely has controlled, which is controlling us now. It's that interest through Britain, which controls us on behalf of Britain to the effect of our self-destruction by these kinds of policies. Now, what they did is these financial interests, like Andrew Jackson was really a trader. He was a British agent, really. And the guy that owned him, who was part of the thing, was also a trader. So we had many presidents of the United States who were in fact traitors because they were British agents against the United States. And they successfully destroyed the United States. 1837. Set into motion, the operation set into motion through the New York banking system, which shut down the constitutional system of national banking and resulted in the 1837 panic, the crash of the U.S. economy. This has happened repeatedly. Lincoln created and used a fixed exchange rate concept in the greenback system. That's in the Constitution. That's constitutional. But they shot Lincoln on British orders, on British direction, and the government changed. And the greenback policy was repealed. And the United States was bankrupted by this treasonous breaking of the greenback policy. How did we get into World War I? Well, they assassinated the President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, whose uncle who had trained him had been the chief spy for the Confederacy in the Civil War. Huh? Another pig. These are the kinds of problems which we have faced. So we had look at the presidents we had. They killed McKinley. How was McKinley killed? He was killed by an imported agent, an assassin, brought in through the Manhattan, through a house in Manhattan, and conveyed around, introduced, and he shot the President of the United States. Now, the right-wing faction, you would call it, the Wall Street faction of the Republican Party, had put in Teddy Roosevelt as vice president. So by killing McKinley, they put the system in the charge of what? Of Teddy Roosevelt. Now, what was happening? The British had never forgiven Germany or Russia in particular for what had happened when the United States had launched the idea of a transcontinental railway system. What had happened is Bismarck had gone for the same thing. Bismarck in 1877 on had reformed the German economy in a very decisive way and had gone for an international or continental railway system organization of an agro-industrial economy. This had been imitated by the Tsar of Russia, with the result of the production of the Trans-Siberian Railroad, which is not merely a railroad, but it was actually under the direction of this program, was a search for the mineral deposits and other natural wealth or potential natural wealth in the entirety of Russia, and to make a railway track which would go through these places where the greatest, richest ore known to them, as Mendeleev, for example, knew, and they built a railway system to connect these areas into Siberia, which contained the richest potential for development of natural resources. Now, what happened then? At this point, Bismarck was a friend of the Russians. They had a Russian agreement. And he was prepared to sabotage any British operation or any Austrian operation which would destroy or impair the relationship between Germany and Russia. The British freaked because the British viewed that as the extension of the end of the British Empire's control of the planet. Because the British Empire's control of the planet had been accumulated in maritime power. If you open up the development of the interior part of a nation through the development of canal systems and then transcontinental railway systems, you have now shifted from dependency upon sea transport, you have now shifted the weight to the development of the interior of the nation, the landed area. And of course, this is the secret of the United States. You see this in the case of what Lincoln did during the course of the Civil War. It was precisely that. He brought in populations from all parts of Europe and China, and brought them into the United States, and this influx of immigration into the United States during and following the period of Lincoln's presidency was what created the greatness of the industrial power of the United States. Because we also brought in with that the same process. We brought in the best knowledge of science, partly which was developed in the United States itself, but we had a transatlantic relationship of Germans, French, and so forth with the scientists in the United States. There's a case of Alexander von Humboldt was key to this particular relationship. So now suddenly you have, with the victory of the United States over the British puppet called the Confederacy, and the British themselves, you had a growing cooperation among Germany, Russia, the United States, and other nations, which were now looking for a transatlantic and broader connection to develop a system of nation states on this planet which would base their relationships on cooperation in these great ventures in the development of the potentiality of mankind. The British consider this a geopolitical threat to the British Empire. That is a shift from maritime imperialism to a shift to landed development of nation states, cooperating nation states. So therefore, that's why they got Bismarck out, which was the beginning of the war. It was the beginning of a permanent system of war from 1890 to the present date. We're still living under permanent warfare prescribed by the British, launched by the British, directed by the British, by the manipulation of stupid Americans and others in other parts of the world. People who are stupid enough to listen to the British Empire, and kowtow to it and treat it as our closest relative. It's close so it can pick your pocket. That's the nature of the beast. So that's where we stand. Therefore, the question is, what should politics in the United States be? Party politics? No. Should parties exist? Yes. Should the government be based on party politics? No. Because party politics is based on the accidents of the present moment. Some idiot leads the Republican Party or some other party. Like you have a clinically insane man like Obama as president of the United States today. The man is clinically insane. He's a British agent, totally controlled by the British. And he's insane. And you find the United States is the one nation which is destroying itself with the help of the Federal Reserve System. The United States is now being finished off in a very short term, if it's continued, by the present policies of the Federal Reserve System. Very soon, the United States will cease to exist if this is allowed to continue. We're not talking about a long-term view. We had a fairly medium-term view back in 2007, when I warned that unless we made a certain change right now, the United States was going into a great crisis. I made a proposal, which is called the Homeowners and Bank Protection Act of 2007, which would have prevented all of the crap that has happened to the United States on the Main since that time. And you have the Democratic Party, among others, led in sabotaging that act. And if you want to know what the problems are in the United States today, look back to how that act was sabotaged. It was building up rapid support on the state level, within the federal states. And then came the bailout. The bailout was the alternative. The bailout has destroyed the U.S. economy. And people are playing this thing as party politics. How about patriotism instead of party? Right now, the parties don't really mean anything. Yes, they do. What they mean is something significant in the sense that the Republican Party is evil. The Democratic Party is noted for its stupidity. The Republican Party for its evil. Now, that doesn't mean all Republicans are evil, because actually, what you've got is not a Republican Party. You have a zoo over there. It's not a party; it's a zoo. And we cannot be run by a zoo. Now, the plans of the Republican Party are to blackmail the administration by striking a very close alliance with the president. Now, the president is not exactly an interchangeable part. It's a question of an interchangeable species. So this president now is already and has been committed to the same policy that the worst of the Republican Party, as typified by Rand Paul, typifies. Rand Paul is virtually an animal. He's a fascist, a strict fascist, no question about it. Huh? And he has to be taken out of office or neutralized. Tennessee is practically, ready to go back to the period before the Tennessee Valley Authority, go back to the swamps again. Produce more of these kind of things like Al Gore's. Yeah. So, therefore, the point is, it's not party as such, it's nation, it's constitution. Now, you have a wave of sophistry inside U.S. politics, which is centered around so-called party loyalty. Do you swear an oath of allegiance to a party? Did any of you swear an oath of an allegiance to a political party, as opposed to the United States? Or did you recall, as you should, the historical basis for the existence of the United States as a unique creation for the benefit of mankind, but as a nation state? We're not going to run the world, but we're going to run a nation state, and we're going to cooperate with other nation states on a common principle, a principle of sovereignty and cooperation among sovereign states. But you don't have loyalty to a party. You have loyalty to a U.S. Constitution and what it means. You don't turn the thing over to dickery between parties. What about the United States? In this conflict, in this melange between the Democratic and Republican Party today, what do we got? And the Tea Party, and maybe the Pea Party next. Who knows what? This melange. Huh? We're destroying the United States because we don't believe in the United States anymore. We make laws which violate the intention of the U.S. Constitution. We adopt policies which are contrary to the very foundations on which this nation was founded. We're a melange of people who are either traitors or too stupid to know what the difference is. And that's the way we have to understand this. So now, what's happening? The election has happened. Well, almost happened. It's probably still not completed yet. The dead have not yet been fully counted and buried. So that's our situation. But so it's not settled in that respect. But what's the debate today is how the Democratic Party is going to get along with a Rand Paul and what he typifies. That degenerate. He's a complete degenerate. He's also an idiot. Certifiable. Look at the Rand Paul's policy. You want to get an idea of what a real idiot is, a dangerous one. His policy is we got to balance the budget. He's nuts. He's talking about balancing the monetary accounts. What about our unemployed? What about our dying citizens? What about the states that are bankrupt, when most of them are? What about the destitution being wreaked upon our people? Is this in our Constitution? How did that SOB get elected in the first place? And there are people like him. This is the policy of the new Obama administration. The second term of Obama is an administration based on the policies of creative destruction by that fascist Schlumberger and his predecessors Nietzsche and so forth. The policy of creative destruction, which is a monetarist conception. This guy is an enemy of humanity. And he's now the newly elected senator from Tennessee. And he's typified by what the leading Republican edge is now. To get the Democratic Party to capitulate. Huh? You know, this is the time, like an old soldier like me, and I'm not much of a soldier, but anyway, the strategist, maybe not soldier. You know, it says, no. We make no concession to Rand Paul. Because the United States' existence, it depends upon physical economic conditions. And money conditions are not physical economic conditions. They're paper. And it's pretty much toilet paper by the time that Bernanke gets through with it right now. We're already in a hyperinflation comparable to that of Germany in 1923. That's the process which is in process now. It's not merely confined to one nation, as Germany in 1923 was a case of one nation within its own borders confined to a certain special treatment. This is now the world economy. But if you look at the pattern, what Europe has rejected is what the United States has accepted. We have accepted the self-destruction of our nation. And Rand Paul typifies that threat. You cannot be a supporter of Rand Paul and a true patriot of the United States. Because you can't defend the United States and its citizens, you're not defending the United States. There's no room for a Rand Paul in a safe United States. What are they going to do? The cuts that they plan, the cuts are going to try to blackmail the Democratic Party leadership into accepting mean mass death in the United States. This is mass murder. This is the destruction of the United States. You're going to find that in the law of the United States? Can the law of the United States or the power of lawmaking of the United States be used to destroy the United States as it's now being destroyed? As Europe is on the way to be destroyed? As Russia is being destroyed by the same kind of policy? And in the long run, China and India, not so long, will also be destroyed. The policy is to reduce the world's population to less than 2 billion people from 6.7. And this is the way to do it. These kinds of economic policies. Real economy is based on physical economy. It always has been. We use certain technologies, for example, in mineral technologies, other things. And we naturally, being not stupid, we don't use the least rich concentrations of ores and things. We use the relatively best concentration of ores and things. Now, by going to the best concentrations, we reduce the amount of that concentration. We increase the population, we increase the rate of consumption of these raw materials. So therefore, a fixed exchange rate doesn't mean anything in terms of economy. It's the rate of increase of the potential relative productive powers of labor that count. And this involves technological progress, or the application of technological progress. It involves great changes in infrastructure, because there can be no progress in the economy without great changes to that effect in infrastructure. Water systems, green systems, in terms of plant life, animal life, all these things. And we use up things in their richest concentration. But we haven't used up the resource, we've used it up in that concentration. Therefore, what do? We go to use higher degrees of power, increased rates of power per capita per square kilometer. We go to higher energy flux density in modes of power use. We go from burning bushes, especially George and his company. We burn the bushes behind us or something because we don't like to see the spectacle. Anyway, and we use up some more in the richer concentration. And we go to, by scientific discovery, we develop technologies which increase the energy flux density. As now we're using, if you're not using nuclear technology, you're not civilized anymore. Because without nuclear technology, we cannot meet the needs of mankind. We require also thermonuclear fusion as a technology. Otherwise, we will not be able to meet the requirements of mankind, even on a fixed level. Because we're withdrawing down some of the richest concentration resources. And we haven't lost them. We haven't lost any mineral resources by using them up. We've lost the rich concentration of mineral resources. Now, how do you compensate that? You go to a higher degree of energy flux density. You go to nuclear power and thermonuclear power right now and beyond that. You start to reach out into the solar system and get control of some of the processes inside the solar system, beyond Earth itself. You increase man's power to maintain the existence and development of mankind. And that's the principle. That has always been essentially the American principle. Since the founding of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, that's been the American principle. That was the principle of Nicholas Acusa. That was the principle of Charlemagne. It was the principle of every great progressive movement for mankind in human history. So that's our criteria. Rand Paul, he's going to cut this, cut that, cut this. This is the Republican program, which they're now trying to shove down the throat of the Democratic Party. And someone says, well, we have to go along with him. I say, no, we don't go along with him. We do not go along with him. You've sworn an oath to uphold this Constitution, to defend this nation. If you're a patriot and an honest patriot, you won't go along with them. They want a crisis? Give them a crisis. Don't concede. Give them a crisis. Change the agenda. Don't try to work within the agenda. The agenda that which has been worked up is a doomed agenda. You lose the nation. How can you compromise to lose the nation? How can you compromise to lose the very meaning of the existence of this nation? How can you betray this nation? And anyone who supports Ron Paul is voting to destroy this nation. And with such people, we don't make agreements. We crush them. We neutralize them. That's what patriots do. Now, I admit that generations lately don't have much patriotism, not because they're unpatriotic, but because they really don't have the culture built into them of the World War II generation, which would have fought this nonsense. And therefore, my job is, there are a lot of good people out there, Democrats and Republicans and so forth, and they are good people, but they're confused. It's like the dog that's trying to mate with a dog of the same sex. And we don't say they're bad, we say they're confused. So you don't make agreements with certain people. It's like the dog that makes that little mistake. And you say, well, what can you do? It's a dog. I mean, how do you explain this to a dog? And how do you, some Republicans and Democrats are like that. And you say, how can you explain this? I mean, after all, they're only poor dogs. Well, they don't take much above the dog level. As a matter of fact, they don't even know how to pee properly. But that's the situation. So therefore, the issue is this: are we willing to stage a fight? Because if we concede to this crowd, now we are not going to have a nation. Now, our predecessors, our patriotic predecessors, have been there before. We've been at that point before. And up to now, the nation has survived because, more or less at one time or another, American patriots have come forth without respect to party, but with respect to the cause of the nation, and defended the nation, even at the risk of their own life, at the peril of their own life. And we're there again. If we do not defend this nation, if we concede, if we compromise with the Ron Pauls, we're not going to have a nation. So what's there to compromise about? Compromise is off the table with this crowd. It's off the table for every patriot. And that's how you define a patriot, is one who says this is off the table. Because you're about to lose this nation. And in my forecasting, I've never been wrong. You better worry. I was right in 2007 in particular. Look what you got. You got exactly what I warned you against. And now you're going to get it full. We can defeat this. Why? Well, forget the politicians for a moment. What do we have in politicians. I believe this is a nation of politicians? No. It's a nation of people. And who is threatened by this? Well, the politicians in the end, yes. They will always get it in the end. Some of them like it. But it's the people. And the people are not being consulted. And consulting means an honest consultation. I'm telling them what you're going to do to them. Huh? And acting with their consent. Knowledgeable consent. By ensuring they have the knowledge they need. You don't make deals with a Rand Paul. You don't. He belongs to an inferior species, or fishes if you prefer. Huh? You don't trade the nation off for a deal that sells the nation down the road to destruction. We have another side to this thing. I mean, that's the primary thing. If we don't understand that, nothing else means anything. If we go along with conceding to the Rand Pauls, we're not going to have a nation. It's not going to exist. And the only people who count are those who are assembled to fight and prevent that from happening, to save this nation. For the people in it. It's the people who are being betrayed. And the politicians cannot go behind the back of the people to betray the people. That's the end. That's what's missing. I've got some good Democrats out there, and they're leading Democrats, and many of them are very intelligent. But they don't have the stamina, apparently. At least maybe I can talk them into it, having the stamina. They all want to compromise. They want to go by successive steps of compromise to get agreement. That's not the way you deal with this kind of situation. We've had too much agreement. That's what the problem has been. Too many deals, too many compromises. And what happens to a person who compromises too much? They become compromised. Divorce court is awaiting them, or something worse. Compromising. Compromised personalities. That's our situation. Now the other side. What's the option? What's the other option? Presuming that we are in tune with reality. Well, right now, the entire planet is about to disintegrate. Why? Well, it's been a long story. You had a story at the end of the war, what the British managed to do once Roosevelt was dead, and Truman with the British conspired to do it, is to set into new system of war. What was created was, first of all, was the so-called Anglo-American war against the Soviet Union and China, essentially. What was this for? Go back to the 7 Years' War. Go back to the Napoleonic Wars. How do you destroy nations? You get them involved in long wars, perpetual wars. They destroy each other. And the British Empire sits back there and laughs about it. The British organized all this stuff. Everything. From their organization against the railroads. Now what is Rand Paul for? Destroying the railroads. An old British trick. Why do he doesn't he go to another country? Go back to Britain. Why does he transfer to British patronage? He doesn't belong in the United States. He's not really one of us. He belongs to something strange. Destroy railroads? We've already done that. Destroy industries? We've already done that. Now, this thing has to be eliminated. But what are we going to do? The other direction. We have a shortage of energy flux density now in terms of production on the planet. We can no longer, on the present level of technology as installed and operating, we can no longer maintain the present population of this planet. We've come to the point that's not possible anymore. We've been living on drawing down accumulated capital improvements of various kinds, including basic economic infrastructure, over this period of time, especially most recently, especially in the past decade. The rate of destruction of the U.S. economy in terms of this past decade, the past 10 years, has been an accelerating rate. It was already started before then, but the rate of destruction of the U.S. economy, willfully, by the hand of government itself, has been monstrous. The same thing has happened in Europe. This coincided in part with what happened with the breakup of the Soviet Union. What happened, of course, was essentially that the British, François Mitterrand of France, Margaret Thatcher of Britain, and George H.W. Bush, the President of the United States, agreed on what's called in effect, the Maastricht Agreement. The Maastricht Agreement was targeted to destroy specifically Europe, continental Europe, especially from Germany into the Soviet Union. And there has been a massive destruction of the economy of Central and Western Europe, and also France and others, since that time. This took off about 10 years ago. And it was the Al Gore paradox that occurred. You had a man who was not fit for habitation among man or beast, Al Gore. And he, through a series of things, which some people understand, became the candidate for the President of the United States. And Al Gore was the guy who elected George W. Bush Jr. And George Bush Jr. was really a nothing, a thuggish creature with no particular intellect. He was really a stooge for other people who used him. And George Bush Jr. did a great deal in destroying the United States and destroying our freedoms. For example, what happened with the cover-up on what happened in the takedown of the tower in New York City. It was a planned operation. Who was it run by? We know who it was run by. We know evidence enough to know who it was run by. It was run by BAE, the British BAE, in collaboration with the leading faction of the Saudi monarchy. We know personally that the Saudi ambassador to the United States was personally involved in recruiting and sustaining pilots who were used in the attack on New York City. And that was covered up. Why did it happen? Well, the British organized it with their usual Saudi accomplice. The same Saudi group which created the wave of terror, of Islamic terror, in this whole region of Southeast Asia, Southwest Asia. That's how it happened. This was used to put dictatorial institutions into operation inside the United States and to create a state of terror which was used to control the population of the United States, wearing out the population that was dying of old age. Because the younger population today generally does not have the characteristics, even the young adult population today does not have the characteristics as a generation which are sufficient to save a nation, to maintain and save a nation. They're too demoralized. They're too oriented to a simplistic conception of personal adaptation to society. That's where the problem comes in. So we are now being permanently destroyed as a planet. What's the intention? The intention is an old one. The intention is to reduce the world population from about 6.7 billion people to less than 2. That's the declared intention of the British Empire. That's the policy of Prince Philip with his World Wildlife Fund and all these other funds, all these other operations. What's happening is the carrying capacity of the planet for human beings is being destroyed. And Rand Paul's initiative is simply a deep cut in the population potential of the United States and of the planet. This guy is worse than Hitler in terms of his policy and the policy he represents. Do you compromise with that? No. Those of us who understand the Hitler phenomenon, understand how it was created, say no. Нет. No. No Hitler. No Hitler-like policy. Rand Paul has a Hitler-like policy. We can't compromise with him. He calls himself a Republican. Say, hey, what's that? It's like, what's a Republican mean anymore? Huh? Like the old story. So what we have before us is the opportunity. Now, what we could do as a nation, if you've got people with the brains and guts in government to do it, and there isn't much in terms of both brains and guts in government right now to do much of anything any good. But maybe we can muster it. Maybe some of the people will become angry enough to insist that their politicians rethink the recent election, which is a farce. A president who's insane is now being given a Republican backing for his insanity. Well, we have a policy. The key to economy, real economy, as opposed to all this monetarist nonsense, is physical economy. That is, mankind, especially with such means as increasing the energy flux density of the modes of production we employ, by increasing the capital intensity in terms of technology that we develop and employ, we are able to increase the power of mankind to exist, to sustain a larger population, and this ultimately means that we're going into space. We're going to extend man's operation into space. Now, we have a policy right now, which my associates and I are pushing, and some other people are sympathetic to, which is this NWAPA project. Now, we've given new meaning to the NWAPA project from what it was meant in 1964, because we are now talking about the new implications which are not read into the design of the NWAPA policy. The NWAPA policy, as it was defined by the company, by the Parsons Company, was a very good design, and it still essentially is the foundation of a very good design. It is a necessary design because we have a situation now. Let's take the United States in particular. Take the western land area. Look at the 20-inch rainfall line. We are now losing the aquifer level of source resources to maintain the production of food in the central states of the United States. We are draining deep wells of water. We're draining the resources, and this is producing a destruction, along with certain policies, a destruction of the ability to produce food. So, and also we've cut out nuclear power. We no longer are competent in nuclear power. We're no longer competent in energy policy, in power policy. We have these windmills and solar powers, solar cells. Windmills? These things, they're only good for killing birds, not as a source of power. And the cost of a windmill is greater from the time of its construction to its demolition when it's worn out. Is greater than all of the income you get from it. The same thing, the solar collector, the same thing. It's a complete waste of time. Well, then what's the natural form? Nuclear power. And Asia's nuclear power. China's nuclear power. India's nuclear power. Japan will be active in nuclear power now. So the sane part of the world is going to nuclear power, and that's already been a little bit late, because we now have to go to thermonuclear power. We need to increase, as has always been the tendency, we increase the energy flux density of the application of power, which enables us to transmute materials and so forth, this sort of thing. Now, in the case of NWAPA, what are we doing? Well, we're realizing what NWAPA means. It not only means an adequate water supply to maintain the fertility of the United States and Canada and Mexico, but it means the steps into space. We are now going into areas with NWAPA in our work on this, which is beyond anything that has been really in recent years, until recent years, has been considered. This thing has the implications. It really is a part of space. When you look at the cosmic radiation relationships, the process of that, and their relationship to what NWAPA means, it means that we actually are on Earth, in terms of NWAPA, we're going into the Arctic, we're going into areas like that. We're into areas of technology where we are really looking at the relationship of what's happening in nearby space, in solar space, how it affects life on Earth, and with NWAPA we are intersecting precisely that question. We are on the first concrete step toward mankind's development of nearby space. This means that we are moving into an area of energy flux density per capita per square kilometer and so forth, which is beyond anything we've considered before. This means we have within hand the power to change the character of the planet, a man's life on the planet, to go to a new platform of level of production, a level where we have the productivity to change the conditions of life. What are we going to do for India? They're doing fairly well so far, but they have big problems. What about Africa? What about South America? What about our other poorer areas of the world? Without these technologies, we really do not have the resources to meet the needs of the existing population of the planet and to continue that process. Why not reach upward, as we in this nation have always tended to do as a nation, to look to higher forms of technology, to improvements in the organization of infrastructure, to all these kinds of things which result in the increase of the productive powers of labor, thus the means to satisfy our needs. That's the alternative. So we come to a time where the third American Revolution has got to occur. We have to go to the people. Don't talk about the politicians. Yeah, the politicians are fine. I know some. No. They can be used. They're useful. Be properly fed and directed and educated, they're useful. Very necessary species. But we're in a situation where we can reach a point right now. Let me get you concrete. What's the program? My program is, number one, Obama out. Why? He's clinically insane. We have a 25th Amendment. 25th Amendment says an insane president can be removed. Now let's stop. Don't worry about the details. He's insane. We have a law. We say that insane presidents cannot be functional. Out. So he's going to be out. That's number one. If you don't get this president out, you're not going to do anything good. Get him out. He's now the new Republican. He's the post-election Republican. And you're going to find out that's true very fast and very painfully. He's going to make Hitler look like a humanitarian. That's what you're dealing with. So what's going to happen then is we have the greatest crisis in all of humanity on our hands now. The option is to move ahead, get him out of there in order to make room for the policy which is needed. Now, the first thing that's needed is actually a formal introduction of Glass-Steagall. Now, only Glass-Steagall will do this itself. Yeah, there is the potential of doing that, agreeing to do that in government among politicians. They know how to do that. But it's not just that we need. We don't just need a Glass-Steagall effect. We need the Glass-Steagall principle, not a Glass-Steagall effect. Difference. We need it for this planet because what we've got to have is a fixed exchange rate system, a planetary fixed exchange rate system. We don't want any more monetary systems. We want a fixed exchange rate system, which is essentially a credit system. That is, each nation creates its own credit. And it creates its own credit in a knowledgeable relationship with other nations which also are creating their own credit. You're going for, as Roosevelt defined, a fixed exchange rate system of credit, not a monetary system, a fixed exchange rate system of credit. National credit. We utter credit, which is then used as credit for financing all kinds of things on credit. For example, NWAPA. NWAPA project is being installed, which can be done after that. Once you've adopted the fixed exchange rate system as part of this reform, the Glass-Steagall reform, you go to fixed exchange rate system, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to do two things. Number one, you're going to cancel this present banking system. You're going back to the protection and development of a commercial banking system as it existed under Roosevelt and in the U.S. tradition generally. So you're going to do that, and then you're going to act to save the federal states of the United States. Now, this is where, Rand Paul is way off base politically, and even as an opportunist. Because if you do not do that, if you not take those measures, get Obama out, get the Glass-Steagall formally adopted as Glass-Steagall, not something that can be managed to look like Glass-Steagall, but formally. If you do not then revise the whole banking system, or banking reform generally, to go back to the U.S. standard of that system, you cannot save this nation. It will not exist. And under the present Federal Reserve system, the nation is about to be finished right now anyway. So the first thing you have to get Bernanke and crowd out. But once we do that, we then have to bail out the states, because the states cannot fund essential state operations on their own resources. The only agency that can do that is the federal government under federal law. We have to save the states which are now disintegrating. Does Rand Paul accept that? He says no. No Rand Paul. Once we do that, now we've got to get some real production. And real production means, inclusively, high-speed modern rail on a large scale. Does Rand Paul and company want rail? He's banning it, eliminate it. Enemy of civilization again, huh? Rand, you're not doing well. We're going to score. Now, how is the rail thing going to develop? How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to finance the long-term credit for the development of NWAPA. How's that going to work? Well, NWAPA, means you're going to be the greatest engineering job that the world has ever seen. It covers Alaska, Canada, the United States, especially the western part of the United States, Canada, and Mexico. A grand project, wonderful. Those of you who are young enough to enjoy that will see some of the most wonderful changes in the landscape you've ever imagined. But what happens then? Well, if you're going to build NWAPA, you're going to build dams, a system of dams, which is higher than any dam you've ever seen. It's comparable to, but greater than, the Three Gorges Dam in China. The greatest dam system, the greatest water system you've ever seen, humanity's ever seen. You're going to have nuclear power all over the place in this thing, because that's the improvement over the Parsons approach to this thing. You're going to change the ecology of the planet. But at the same time, how are you going to do this? You're going to have to build railway lines from places such as New York State, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, out to St. Louis and down into certain parts of the southern states. Because without this rail development, you cannot provide the material developed which is necessary for the Nawapa project. What you're talking about, therefore, is a sudden increase in the employment, and usually largely skilled employment, including highly skilled employment, of about 4 million people. And it starts on a dime. The minute the law is passed to implement that policy, which depends upon the previous steps I indicated, once that's done, we are out of the woods. We're on the way to a recovery. And then if you take this thing and say, let's apply the same thing globally, well, globally is obviously break through the Darien Gap in South America with a rail system. We can do it. Trans-Africa, in Africa, we can save Africa, particularly that part of Africa, which will save all of Africa. It can be done. What will happen in Siberia, especially after we have the agree on the tunnel or rail and tunnel combination in the Bering Straits between the Nawapa project operating in Alaska and Siberia, you have a revolution in the world system, an economic revolution. This we can do. This can be the achievement of the coming generation, which can be completed within 2 generations, 50 years. Within 50 years, we can transform this planet. Within 50 years, we will be ready then to launch the effort on Mars. We can reach that point now. We can make revolutions, scientific revolutions, which we in the basement, for example, are discussing and exploring now. Tremendous potential. So why should we take this crap? Isn't it worth more than your life to ensure that what Rand Paul and the Democrats who would butter his bottom would do? Wouldn't it be worth it to take the effort to do that for the sake of a couple of coming generations of humanity, for the benefit of humanity as a whole? Isn't it worth that? This is the time and kind of the issue on which a great statesman would go to the point of declaring war to protect that opportunity. There is no moral excuse for compromise. And the only way you're going to win against these bastards is not by placating them. You're going to win by crushing them, and it can be done.